to our second season of Choices Global, a production of First Assembly of God, Wortmanville, Georgetown, Guyana. As we continue to cultivate conversations pertinent to nation building, today I'm joined around this virtual roundtable with a group of panelists, all Guyanese, to engage on the value of sports to our dear nation. Our panel includes Dr. Marcel Hudson, an educator for over 30 years, the author of two books, and currently serving as our nation's Chief Education Officer. Dr. Wilbert Lee, a retired colonel of the Guyana Defense Force, with a range of expertise including security, project management, and transformational leadership. Limar Williams, a University of the West Indies law graduate and a Caribbean personality. David Hormenstein, a community change agent with expertise in national customs and excise operations. Siobhan Corbin, a finance expert and FCCA working with a global financing institution in Switzerland. And yours truly, Samantha Edwards, your moderator, joining you from beautiful Guyana. Panelists, welcome. Today we want to contribute to the discourse on the benefits of sports, the history, the unity, the economy, and let's see where the discussion goes. We would like to focus our discussion on also on cost infrastructure and if possible make some comparisons with nations like Jamaica, Switzerland, and probably some other larger nations like the US and China. So as we begin the discussion, let's consider the point of strategic planning for Guyana. Should Guyana have a national long term plan? And what are some priority areas that can create a platform for sports success in Guyana? Panelists, let's discuss. Dr. Hudson, I'll call on you to start, and then Dr. Lee and the others can chime in as they feel impressed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you're correct when you say everything should start with a strategic plan. I think what is important is planning from a holistic perspective. I know, for example, we have subject ministries in Guyana, and those ministries, those subject ministries, they are responsible for specific areas. However, I think if planning is going to be effective, it has to be holistic. I think that I think there's a role in the process of planning for sports. There's a role for example, the Ministry of Culture. There's a role for the Ministry of there's Ministry of Education. So I think the ideas should come from a pool of persons before we arrive at a comprehensive document. And in terms of in that plan, how you would know what to include in that plan if we want to advance in a particular sporting area. I think what we have to do is to conduct a survey, and we have to look in the areas where our students have the proclivity or the propensity to do well in a particular area. So you would recognize that some sporting events are stronger in some communities than others. And so if you do a survey, you could get a sense as to what are the areas that persons are likely to excel. So the point I'm making is that you just don't decide, well, I'm putting down boxing, cricket, athletics, and so on. But you have to do a survey first, in my view, to see where we could be effective, because you don't want to engage in an activity of futility, but you want to engage in an activity that will bear fruit. And so a strategic plan is very important. The strategic plan is more long term. It has a vision, it has a mission, It has objectives, it has tasks, and it has persons who are going to be responsible for the execution of certain tasks. It has indicators to measure how you're performing, and if you need to tweak something, change something, and so on. So it's not just writing something on a paper, but it has to be something that is done strategically. You know, it was the West Indies cricket captain, Clive Lloyd. Some persons believe that when we planning for sports, we just plan, and as long as you're strong and you're fit, you're ready to box, you're ready to play cricket. But I like how Clive Lloyd put it. He said in many sporting events, only 90% of that particular sport it involves the real physical aspect. 10%, sorry, and he said 90% of any game or any sport you're going to engage in, if you're going to be effective, it starts from the neck up, 90%, and the 10% is from the neck down. And so what he's doing, or what he was doing, is making a case for education, making a case for planning, making a case for organizing, evaluating, and strategizing. And so I believe a strategic document is the way to go. A 5 year plan, maybe, that is futuristic. And of course, we have to look at the indicators as to how we perform and to see whether you want to remain on that particular path or you want to move in another path. For example, and I'll close with this, the Cubans, for example, Cubans, they are very good at boxing. And at a very tender age, they spot talent and put those children into camp. So by the time they're 15, 16, 17, they're ready for gold medals. And so it's not just a one-shot thing. When sports come around, or Olympics in the year, you look for certain people and then you put them to participate. But this thing has to do with long-term strategic planning if you're going to be effective and get gold medals.
I certainly share the sentiment expressed by Dr. Hudson. A strategic plan that encompasses the various sporting discipline is absolutely necessary. I want to point to a document, I can't remember the year, when Guyana produced its strategic development plan. Sport was considered a critical element in that plan because a sport has shown to the world that it has a unifying effect on the populace. So from that standpoint, I want to posit that it's absolutely important that we have a strategic plan. The other aspect also is that Guyana has a very youthful population, and we need to find a way where not only we utilize the skill set that are available among our young people, but more importantly, we plan for their future. Just like how we plan how we intend to have them excel at the various scholastic examination and all of that, I think also we need to consider the important aspect of sport. And so we need to plan. And when we do a strategic plan, it is not simply, or should not simply be, the various disciplines that we would encompass, but I think critical is the building of infrastructure, world class infrastructure, considering what is happening around the world, and also we provide the necessary resources, both financially and material resources. So where we have talent, or where we can spot talent, we have in the system facilities that can help them. The last point I want to talk about is in strategic planning also. It's how we can merge, or we can morph our education system, where we look at scholastic achievement and we twin it with sporting activity. Because sometimes we might have talent, but because the system doesn't provide a two-track approach, if I may say, where a student can at the same time pursue academic excellence while at the same time pursuing some sporting discipline. If that is not in place, we might be losing, or we might be missing some of our talent who can really blossom forth. So, indeed, a strategic plan is necessary.
I'd like to add that in the planning, there must be a lookout for the individual aspect, as Dr. Lee alluded to, spotting, because from our history, we find, or we can easily go back and we can see, it is nothing that the government really did that brought us the Clive Lloyds, the Chandra Pauls, the Hooper, the Mikey Parises, and so on. Those sportsmen came from individual family efforts. So, whatever the plans are, they must be going to families and recognizing these people who had the talents and helping them to trust forward, because this is where we will find the goal. This is where we find the potential, where the family, where a father, case in point, Shivna Ryan Chandra Paul, I don't want to say his village community name, but it was a father. Oh, you don't want to go to school? All right, stay from school, but me go make you where you want to be. And the father would bowl him, and he would have to stand there. So in our planning, let us go to families. Let us do these research or whatever we do, so that we could go to the homes to find out who is doing what, who is interested in what, and get it done. And if we come to holistically, I have a knowledge of the facilities in Beijing after the Olympics. Those facilities were given to the youths of China. I stood there and I watched young people going in and out of these facilities. Do you know China now is medaling in the athletics 100 meter? They're coming up with silver. Very soon they will run away with gold. They're medaling in the 100 meters relays, coming up with silver. Very soon they will come up with gold because of strategic planning. Thank you.
With anything in relation to strategic planning, I think it should be twofold. I love the foundation that the gentleman would have laid, and when you look at sports, especially in Guyana, we should look at the development of sports and sport for development. So Dr. Hudson would have alluded to the research, development, and planning. So you just can't go out and make a plan without actually knowing the specific areas to target. So, for instance, in Guyana, we place a lot of emphasis on table tennis, cricket, football. And so it would be wise to not just bring facilities for those sports, but we should look and target other areas that we can develop. So, for instance, we have a young great swimmer with potential. So we should look at the athletics, see how we can improve in those areas. And then we have to focus more on capacity building also, along with administrative reform. So with any plan that we're making, capacity building, I oftentimes hear that we have a lot of talented runners, swimmers, footballers, cricketers. I myself used to play football, but capacity building is important because while I play football, we need to if you look at our young athlete, Mr. Archibald. I'm not singling him out to put any bad light on him, but I'm just showing you he's an excellent runner. He's the top athlete in our country. But when he goes to these events, because of the lack of facilities and capacity, we see that he makes it. He wins. He usually wins the preheat, but when he meets to the heats and the main event, he does a fairly average showing. Why? Because the capacity, his capacity, he's the best in the country, but on an international level, he needs to increase. So we look at our athletes, very talented athletes. We have to build their capacity. Then we look at participation, total participation. We look at ways in which we can have our athletes participate. Because for me, I told my mother once that I wanted to be a footballer. She was like, "Yeah, that's not going to happen." So I was like, but I love the sports. I was fairly good at it, but total participation, the incentive to participate, it wasn't there. So if we, as Dr. Lee would have alluded to, if we allow um, the scholastic aspects of our youths, especially in their lives while they pursue education, if we can focus any plan, any strategy on financing both their sporting talent and their education, that would go a far way. The enabling environment. David would have alluded to that. We need to create stadiums. We have one track. I mean, we're not bashing at anything, but in order to increase participation, we need an enabling environment. And then when we switch over to the plan sport for development, we can marry the the beneficial aspects of sport, because when you develop sport, you can use sports to develop. So we can use the social aspect. Like sports bring us together as a nation and what's not. So any plan, it must be strategic. It must not just be sport. You're looking at the development of sports only, but we must use sport for development. And so we must be conscious. We make conscious and deliberate decisions in how we approach this issue as a nation.
Well,
Thank
I would
you.
like to jump in and echo maybe what most of the panelists have said, and to suggest that in the context of Guyana, Dr. Hudson spoke about the need for a comprehensive plan that includes the vision and all of that. And what I think many of our smaller nations like Guyana tend to do is look at the high performing nations at the Olympics and then say we are not good enough. And we become frustrated rather than working our plan. And what I want to do is contrast with the Swiss experience that we have had supporting our children, Limar, in football alongside education. And to say that the way in which we've been able to leverage that opportunity for our children is because the focus of some of or many of the developing or developed nations is to not look at sports to win medals, but rather to look at sports as an important aspect of life and for the betterment of society at large. And so when you do that, you're not looking at sports every 4 years for an Olympics like David indicated, but you are looking at sports with all of the elements that a plan should include, meaning the welfare of society, meaning that society as a whole is interested in sports for their wealth, starting from their health, meaning rather than just a few good persons. Everybody should like biking, everybody should like hiking, everybody should like some kind of jogging. And this, for me, is what I'm even reading from the Swiss national sports policy, where they say sports is important as an aspect of life and consequently for all of society. And they see the main elements of any sports plan to include the welfare of the nation, stability of what we provide for the entire society when it comes to sports, alongside building the education system that complements it, focusing on health, safety, and then naturally creating the general infrastructure. And then, as Dr. Hudson alluded to the fact that we need to assess where we are when we develop a plan. And some of the things that I can share from the Swiss perspective is that they have some key targets or they acknowledge their shortcomings. They talked about a third of the Swiss population not being engaged in enough physical activity. So you see how they've shifted from an individual sport to creating sport as a culture and a way of life. And if I look at Guyana's 2019 draft strategic plan, we capture many of the same things. So it's not that we're doing anything different from the developed nations. We have the ideas. They talk about education and the fact that there was a reducing trend in the Swiss system towards extracurricular activities such as sports. And I know that when we lived in Guyana and had one of the best schools that our children attended to. Myself and husband always reflected on the fact that the school was very good on education, but very much lacking in terms of pushing the children and promoting sports. And this, for me, is one opportunity where the government could work at enhancing what the private schools do, as opposed to the public schools where you do have that natural avenue through our annual sports events in Guyana to harness, the talents of our children coming up. And then the plan speaks about ensuring women aren't underrepresented, looking at our existing resources and structure. Do we have enough open spaces? Are we developing sports infrastructure in all of these new communities where we're building? And I think finally what I want to suggest as we continue talking about the plan is to say that David referenced China as an emerging sports nation. We have Jamaica just next door, and we've seen how Usain and all of the others, Merlin Otti and all these people who came before Usain, they were paving a way. And so when we as Guyanese look to sports, I want to encourage us as a developing nation that we don't measure our success and progress by medals, but rather work the plan that we have. The sports economy is about 471 billion annually, and the US spends about 32% of all of the growth of the global spend. 32% is spent by the US, 12% by China is the second highest. And you could see how that translates to medals. So then it means I'm definitely signaling that once we have a plan, we definitely then need to look at the financial resources that could have that plan become something of benefit to our nations. And then naturally we start to build out the associations for each of the specific sports, like athletics, as we are familiar with, like boxing that we know Dr. Hudson is passionate about, and football, for example, which was a sport our kids never pursued in Guyana, but had the opportunity simply because the extracurricular activities in the school allowed them to experiment. They experimented with gymnastics, they experimented with sword fencing, and I was still hopeful that we would have a sword fencing medal with the Guyana flag flying. But alas, the guys decided football is it. And so, Limar, you'll probably be able to write about them in the future. Over to you, moderator.
Thank you, panelists. You've all extended on the point of planning, and I like that we all singing from the same song sheet that planning is critical and very. I like also that Siobhan pointed out that it's not a case where Guyana, again, we do not have a plan. But what I'm getting from you is that maybe we're not seeing it being materialized as it is in black and white. So, and I don't want our viewers to think it's all doom and gloom in Guyana. While I know the podium at the Olympic is not a favorite or a frequent stop for Guyanese, can you think of areas of success that you think we have gotten right? I'm putting you on the spot here. And how can we maximize that or continue to build on that? Because I'd rather suspect that we are doing something right, but we just probably need to expand a little more.
I certainly think the participation and availability of athletes is something that we've gotten right as a nation, because you look at our athletes, they go to the, like, recently the Commonwealth Games, and we have athletes performing in table tennis, for instance, Miss Chelsea Edgill and Shamar Britton doing excellent jobs. And I think that is one area that we've gotten right, because we have our athletes, they're willing, right? They're ready and willing to participate. That is something that many nations, we if it's a case that we have, um, let's say, running, we have like all of our athletes, Emmanuel and the guys, they're already they're first up willing to run and these things. So that's something that I think personally that we've gotten right. We've managed to instill that in our youth. Cricket, for instance, we've produced a lot of great, excellent cricketers. For instance, Mr. Hetmeyer and Rutherford and those guys. It's like within our nation we have the talent. We've done an excellent job at producing them. It's just taking it to the next level, and I think we're heading in the right direction.
Is
Thank you,
warming up
Limar.
in the background to comment. He's showing some shadow punches, but we have done exceptionally well at boxing as a national sport. Cricket, we have been um, collectively looked at as part of the West Indies team, but in boxing, we have a Olympic bronze medal, 1980. We have won Commonwealth Championship. We had, I can't remember the Division 6 heavyweight won in. So we have stood out as a nation. And I think boxing has the potential as one of the areas that if we really focus on, we stand, I think, the greatest opportunity to go further. Boxing is cheap in the sense that it doesn't require, to my mind, significant financial input. Because if you look at the areas where our boxers are from, you might not want to admit, but they have come from depressed communities, probably because they have to fight for so many things. And so we have produced world-class boxers coming out from those areas. So I think if we focus, if we expend money and we improve those facilities, quite a lot of our gyms have gone into disrepair. West End Gym, All Boys Stung, Save the Children. I can go on. The Guyana Defense Force, the Guyana Police Force. We did exceptionally well. So my call here is that if we focus, if we expend more, and if we develop those facilities, we will do exceptionally well at boxing.
I think we're coming through in other sports, as highlighted by Limar. We saw young Ejil in the last, at least she got past the first round, something that has happened that has never happened in our history. There are other sporting areas that we are coming through in, but this whole thing about success, I think it is Winston Churchill who said, success is never final and failure is never fatal. It is courage that matters. I think we have an issue where persons would have attained some success to a degree and they stop there. But successful people continue on to be more successful because that is the nature, it becomes a part of them. And so I think, again, we have done reasonably well in, as we heard Dr. Lee mention, boxing and the cricket. But one of the things that we don't understand, and lots of the people who do well, they don't understand the importance of continuity when you reach to a certain point. Boxing calls for a discipline, and again, lots of people believe it's just about throwing punches. It's more than throwing punches in boxing, it's more than playing shots in cricket. One of the things we've noticed now is that soon as one of our young men make the cricket team, they resort to wearing gold earrings and studs and dyeing hair and so on, and they're more into fashion. And so we have to understand nothing is wrong with the fashion, in my view, but I'm saying the same energy that is being exerted to go to a salon and make sure that your hair is done, make your hair pierce and have the diamond stud. That same energy must be applied also when you come to the crease to play cricket and when you go to the ring to box. Again, no sporting event persons could excel without a support system, and I think we have mentioned that. So I don't think we could rule out the whole issue also of patriotism. In some Caribbean contexts, you find that when persons excel, sometimes rather than people align themselves with you, they look at how you're doing well, and sometimes this whole thing about envy and jealousy steps in, and you don't find people rooting for you. And this is another thing. I remember when Chavez was being beaten by Meldrick Taylor for 15 rounds, and in the last round, the coach said, Julio, think about Mexico, think about your family, think about your friends, your community, and so on. This man found an energy. So there's an important role for patriotism also, and the issue of mentorship and coaching. Those things are so important. Mike is extremely well with Gus D'Amato because Gus D'Amato was a thinker. Muhammad Ali did extremely well with Angelo Dundee. You have never thrown a punch because Dundee was a thinker and he made the sport a study. And so, for us to, as you say, my sister, if we are going to excel in those particular areas that we have done well, we have to take into consideration the support system that is around us. And we have to take into consideration commitment, because talent without commitment will still lead to your downfall. We have to take into consideration patriotism. The people of a country must root for their people rather than say, you know what, they're getting a lot of money now, they're rich, and look at them now, they're big and rich and switch. You know, because I mean, I'm a sociologist, and then I walk among people and I look at the behavior patterns of people, you see these elements playing out. And so patriotism is also, to my mind, critical. But yes, the infrastructure, the Cubans already, in terms of boxing, those guys box around the year. There are many talents leading from, there are many events. You have the novices, and we have it in Guyana too. But those guys have, in between novice, there's another tournament, another tournament. So you know what's happening all the time? Those guys are sharpening their skills. Shivnarine Chanjapal, for example, he demonstrated a level of commitment beyond measure. He bought a bowling machine, and in Miami, when men would refuse to bowl him, he has a machine bowling him because you know why? He's not concentrating on the ear piercing and the daikon. He's concentrating on playing the game, and that's why to this day he's one of the most stubborn batsmen that West Indies has ever produced and successful batsmen. So commitment, dedication, support system, patriotism, all of these things are fundamental if we're going to advance. And the last thing I want to say about the strategic plan, research has shown that only 10% of all the plans really get executed efficiently. So the other 90% of the plan sits on the shelf. But for the plan to be executed, what has to happen? The people must make the plan come alive, and people must sign on to the plan, as we heard Siobhan saying, sign on to the plan. One of the reasons why we have not been doing extremely well in selling sports in school, there is still a feeling, there's still a belief that education is the only way, the academics. Once people start moving to sports, parents believe that people are wasting their children's time. And maybe they have a reason for doing that because of how the thing may not be structured in a way that they're seeing light at the end of the tunnel. But I believe Guyana is in a good place. The Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said a journey into 1,000 miles begins with a single step. We can't suddenly become these people who are doing extremely well in everything. It's a process. And I believe, watch and see Guyana in the future. I'm not beating Guyana. I'm saying that there's a great future ahead. And as people buy these ideas and plan holistically, we could see a transformation in the sporting arena in this country.
Thank you, Dr. Hudson. And it's sad that when all the panelists are now getting worked up is when we're almost out of program time. So briefly, any final thoughts? Anyone would like to share? Just one panelist, I'll give that opportunity.
Yeah.
I just
Well,
want to
if I
say
may jump
that
in.
unless and until the government or the people of Guyana take the opportunity to make this strategic plan 30 years or 40 years, then unless and until that is done, then those who come through will only be coming from families. None of the names mentioned that we call in cricket, in boxing, football, table tennis, none came through a government strategic plan. All came from individual families who succeeded.
Thank you. Thank you very much, our panelists. Don't be dismayed. Like I mentioned earlier, this topic cannot be completed in one session. So we will be continuing on the 25th of September when we will go into other areas, more specifically like health, education, and the economics of sports. So thank you once again for tuning in to another episode of Choices Global. Please feel free to keep in touch with us at faog.org and join our YouTube channel, Choices Global. Remember to stay safe. This is Choices Global.